Hi, I'm Sharon Winsmith, a tax attorney, active investor, and your go-to resource for proven investment and tax planning strategies. In this video, I'm going to tell you about a great strategy that can help set your kids up for retirement early in life. If you do this strategy and start it soon enough in your kid's life, you can make it where they earn millions and millions of dollars for their retirement and don't have to save another dime again. You want to start this strategy as early as possible, ideally when the kid's 10 years old or 15 or 18 at the latest, but you want to teach them how to start saving at an early age as well as get the benefit of long-term compounding. So this strategy involves using a Roth IRA that you're going to set up on behalf of your kids. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This is what I call the Roth strategy for your children. It's really pretty basic. What you're going to do is have a Roth IRA set up on behalf of your kid. Your child is going to receive income. I'll talk in a minute about the specific type of income it has to be and the requirements around that, but they're going to get some sort of income that they earn, and then they're going to make contributions to a Roth IRA account. So, of course, we don't want a 10-year-old or even a 15-year-old managing their own Roth IRA account. So the way you set this up is by setting up a custodial Roth account. You can do this really easily at a place like E-Trade, Schwab or Fidelity. They usually always offer the ability for you to set up a custodial Roth account on behalf of your kid. The way those custodial accounts work is that you'll manage the account on behalf of the child, and then once the child hits age of majority, then they'll take over the account. So age of majority varies by state, so just look up whatever it is for your own state. But you want to set this up, obviously, without giving your kid full unfettered control over that account from the beginning, unless they're already old enough and responsible enough to do this on their own. So there's two ways you can really do this strategy in practice. The best way, and the way it's usually done, is that if you have a business where you're the sole owner or some sort of family business, you pay your child through your business. So you'll have your kid do some sort of work for the business. It has to be bona fide work. It can't just be, something you make up that isn't real. You have to have them do work on behalf of the business, pay them some sort of, amount every year. And then the great part about this strategy is that you get the tax deduction. So not only and I'll tell you more in the second section about how great this benefit is, because what's going to happen in effect is that you're going to pay your child through the business. You get a business deduction on your tax return for that payment. You're going to do this in a way that your child doesn't have to pay income tax on that amount that they get. They're going to then contribute a piece of that, or they're going to max out their Roth IRA contribution. And then that amount is going to grow tax-free for the rest of their life. So it's basically money that you get a tax deduction for paying through your business that your child's never going to pay tax on again, because they didn't pay tax when they earned it, if we do this right, and they put it in a Roth IRA account, which we know is going to grow tax-free. If you do this soon enough, the amount of that account is going to explode, and they're never going to have to pay tax again, because you get to take distributions from a Roth IRA without paying any tax. It's contributions on a post-tax basis. So that's why this strategy is so powerful. Let's say you don't have a business where you can do this, then your child's going to need to earn some sort of wages from a part-time job. Obviously, if they're young enough, they're going to be limited in what they can and can't do. States do have, most states have a labor law that's going to be a minimum age before a child can start working. If you have a family business, most states have an exemption for this. So, even if there is a law that says your kid can't work below whatever age, if it's a family business, there's usually an exemption where your child can still work on behalf of your business. If you don't have a business, you may be stuck with this, age limit. But, have your kid go out in the neighborhood, cut somebody's grass or something and get some sort of payment. So there's all kinds of things that you can have your child do. They don't need to be making a ton of money. Really, you'll see, you just want to try to max out those Roth IRA contributions, which at the time I'm recording this, in 2024, it's going to be $7,000. So just some sort of part-time job that your kid can legally do where you can get them at least $7,000 a year. So there's a few requirements I want to make sure that you know about. The income must be earned income. You cannot just gift kids. So I know a common strategy we use is we do tax-free gifts where, each spouse gives up to the tax-free gift amount. It's about $17,000 right now. Then that is not subject to tax. The kid cannot use that $17,000 or whatever amount you gift them and contribute that. It's got to be earned income. It's got to be wages. So, work on behalf of a business, work where they're going out and earning that money. It also can't be, if for some reason you've passed down, stocks to your kid, it can't be dividend income from your stocks. It can't be, passive income that they earn from investments that they own or something like that. It's got to be earned income. It's got to be wages. They don't have to be an employee. They're probably not going to be an employee, but they can be an independent contractor. It's 1099 income or W-2 type income. You cannot pay your child for, chores or just regular household tasks. I know people try to skirt this by, saying, clean up the kitchen and I'll pay you, $7,000 a year if you do that, every now and then. You can't do that. You can't just pay them for chores. It's got to be earned income. It's got to be real work. So, think about something that, you would really pay for yourself. You wouldn't, pay your kids to do their regular chores. You would kind of have an expectation that they would do that. So what I like to do here is, in a lot of cases, if you're going to have a kid, for example, that wants to cut the grass, is I like to do a neighbor swap. So instead of having your kid cut your grass, have your kid go cut your neighbor's grass. And then, their kids can come cut your grass, or do some sort of swap where it doesn't look like you're paying for chores. Have them get out there, do some work for the neighbors, start really making them learn what it's like to work at an early age, teach them discipline, teach them financial responsibility by taking that amount and saving it and not spending it. And the last thing I want to mention is that the payment must be reasonable. Like I said, you can't have your kid, file some paperwork for you for your business and pay them $30,000 a year. You also don't want to pay them that much, which I'll explain on the next slide when we go through an example. But, it's got to be reasonable. It's got to be what you would pay a third party. So if you're paying your kid to do something for your business, it's got to be the amount that you would pay, some third party to come in and do that same work. So keep in mind, don't get greedy here. The minute you start getting greedy or doing something fishy, then you're going to get caught. So, this isn't a red flag. People do this. Every good, smart business owner does this already. A lot of people I know do this with their kids, even if they're W-2 and don't own a business. But don't get greedy. Don't try to, push the upper limits of this. Just be reasonable and just use the strategy it's intended to work. So I just want to go through a quick example so you can see how this would look in practice. So, in 2024, at the time that I'm recording this, max Roth-IRA contributions are $7,000. So you want to try to get your kid in the habit, if you can, of maxing out that contribution. So $7,000, of course, that's going to go up every year. I don't know what it's going to be in the future. So with my modeling, I've only used $7,000. I haven't taken into account inflation, but in future years, they're going to be able to put in a lot more than $7,000, but you're also going to be able to justify paying them more because of inflation. So the max amount they can contribute to the Roth is $7,000. So if you pay them $12,000, they can only put $7,000 into a Roth. They can't put more than that. The excess you can let them spend on what they want, or if you want to, put that into a different account that's not a Roth, just, a brokerage account, a custodial brokerage account that you're managing for them. That's another great strategy that people do a lot. But just keep in mind, you can only put up to $7,000 or whatever that year's max is. So the standard deduction for 2024 is $14,600. This is going to be important because if you pay, or if you pay your kid through your business below the standard deduction, or if they go out and get a job, cutting the neighborhood grass or whatever it is, then if the total money they make for the year is below the standard deduction, they do not need to file a tax return. If they don't need to file a tax return, they don't pay any tax on it. So this is what I said in the beginning about why this strategy is so powerful, is that you can pay them $14,600 and they can take $7,000 of that, put it in a Roth IRA account. If you really want to supercharge this, take the other $7,600 and put that in, some other sort of investment account for them. They don't have to pay any tax. If you did it through your business, you get a business deduction. The $7,000, that Roth IRA is going to grow tax-free for the rest of their life. So that's why this is really powerful. Just a basic example of, how powerful this really can be when you look at numbers. Let's say we have a 10-year-old, working on behalf of your business, and you're going to pay them $10,000 a year. They're doing things like, they're 10 years old, so they can't do, too much sophisticated work, but everybody can do something. They can do some data entry. They can do filing organization work. They can, organize files for your business, whatever it is, find some work. Kids are really smart these days. They're really good with social media. You can get them doing social media type work and content creation really early. You'd be shocked at what your kids can do. So, whatever it is, find something that makes sense, pay them a reasonable amount. Of that $10,000, the kid's going to take $7,000, max out their Roth IRA. You're going to put that into their custodial Roth IRA account, and you just recycle this. Have the kid keep doing this. Because it's only $10,000, it's below the standard deduction. They don't need to file a tax return, so they're not paying any tax on this, and you got a business deduction through your business for paying them that $10,000. So one thing I want to mention is that if for some reason the kid gets other income other than this, $10,000 you're paying them through their business, let's say, I don't know, they inherited some stocks, or whatever, they own stocks and they get a bunch of dividend income. You have to look at total income when you're talking about filing tax returns. So if they may get $10,000 for, doing work for your business, but if they get another $5,000 for, dividend income, for example, they got to file a tax return. So look at the total income your kid's getting if they have income from other sources. The other thing I want to, pay, just a trap for the unwary here, don't pay your kid exactly the standard deduction. I've seen people do this. Don't just say, I'm going to pay them $14,600 every year, whatever the standard deduction is. That looks bad. That's kind of a red flag on your tax return. It looks a little bit too convenient. So pay them a reasonable amount, pay them whatever, but I wouldn't back into to where it's exactly that amount because it just looks bad optically. So let's say you have your 10-year-old kid doing this for your business. They're going to do this every year. They're going to keep putting $7,000. That's not a lot of money to a lot of us that are, older and been working for a while, but it's a lot of money to someone who's just out of college and just started working. So you get them in the habit of doing this every year. So let's say, you've taught your 10-year-old every year for the rest of your life, you need to put $7,000 into that Roth-IRA, invest it in a smart way that it's going to earn returns. When your kid turns 65 years old, and I just modeled this, assuming 7,000 contribution every year, I didn't go up. We know it's going to be a lot higher because we know the amount we can put in is going to be a lot higher, but you got your kid in the habit of putting $7,000 in every year. That account should be worth, over 14 million by the time they're 65 years old. So this is what I mean when I say, if you just get your kid into the habit of saving, $7,000 a year, putting that into a Roth IRA account, then they can have an account worth that much at 65. They're not going to need, hopefully to save, more money for retirement, of course, because you taught them good financial responsibility early. We know they're going to have other sources of savings, but I just want you to see how powerful this strategy is. Let's say, your kid gets to 18 years old, they stop working for your business, they go off to college, and they can't keep making those $7,000 contributions to the Roth IRA. So they only do the Roth IRA $7,000 contributions from, 10 years old to 18-year-old, for example. That account could still be worth over $8 million if it's invested smartly and getting, average returns in something like an S&P 500 index fund. So they don't have to do it the rest of their life. They could just do it, while they're working, in your house, working for your business. And that's still $8 million they're going to get at age 65. So let's say, you couldn't start them at 10 years old. Let's say they couldn't start working till 15 years old. Then that account could still be, if they keep doing $7,000 every year when they're, 15 and older, then that account can be worth over 9 million. But I want to show you the difference in 9 million if you started them at 15 years old, as opposed to 14.5 million if you started them at 10 years old. Those 5 years make a huge difference. It equates to, almost $5 million additional money because of the benefit of compounding. We know that, the more and more compounding, it really gets powerful later and later, the longer term you look out. So the earlier, what's important is the earlier you can start this strategy, the better. So get them started as early as possible, and you're going to have, a tons of money in that account if you can get them doing it soon enough. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is just, a lot of people ask me, what are examples of types of work that you could have the kid do for the business? What could be qualifying work? You probably know this better than me. Just be smart. What would you theoretically pay someone to do? They could organize files. I may not pay someone to come in here and organize my files for me, but it certainly would save me a lot of time doing it. So, I can certainly pay a kid for doing that. Data entry, that can be, just entering data into an Excel spreadsheet. It can be looking at, entering metrics for your business, whatever it is. Get creative here. Content creation, I mentioned this, kids are better at this stuff than we are. I mean, my, 10-year-old niece is learning in school how to use Canva and other tools like that, and how to do graphic design, photography, blog posts, things like that. Get them started as early as possible. Social media management, they're way better at this than we are. They understand social media in a way that we don't. They can do, social media management, marketing, content creation, video editing, research. As they get older and older, you can start to see the type of work that they do be more and more technical. Bookkeeping. I love teaching kids bookkeeping early in life. This is an important skill everybody needs to know. They can understand, basic accounting philosophies and things like that. Email marketing, that's something a lot of us do. That's something that's important. That goes back to kind of graphic design, things like that. Customer service, if your kid is old enough, they could be doing stuff like that. Website management, a lot of kids know how to build websites and, make updates and that type of thing. Scheduling and planning, very administrative type tasks. You can always have your kids do that and help out with that. So, whatever you can come up with that makes sense is justifiable, and, pay them a reasonable amount for that type of work. Obviously, you can't pay someone that's organizing files and doing data entry as much as you could pay someone doing email marketing and customer service and, website managing. So just be smart with this. Don't get too greedy. Be careful with doing this with really young kids. I know people there's some viral YouTube videos about people paying their kids to do photo shoots for their business. I don't like that. I don't know any really good, tax advisors who would really sign off on that. But, be careful, especially when kids are younger than 10 years old. What can they really do? that you would, pay a lot of money for. So just watch out for that. Other thing is, you need to think about how you're supposed to report this on your tax return. If you have to, do you run this through your payroll as a W-2 as opposed to a 1099? Work with your CPA on that. I want to cover the strategy. I want to focus on the big picture here and, the $1 million questions of, how do we get our kids early to save millions and millions of dollars for retirement? These are really $100 questions that you can work with your CPA on. Or I also cover this in my business tax strategies course, how you report this and the right way to do this as far as when to pay your kid as a W-2 as opposed to a 1099. So hopefully, you found this strategy very helpful. Hopefully this is something that you can get your kids started doing early as possible. Again, just remember with this, what's critical is that you have them doing this at as early an age as possible. This strategy is extremely powerful. It teaches your kids so many things more than just giving them, the ability to have a bunch of money in retirement. It teaches them financial responsibility, discipline, how to save money, how to get out there, and get used to doing the grind every day and working and making money. And, it teaches them confidence because they'll feel better about themselves for doing that and the value that they're providing. So hopefully you found this strategy helpful. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to our channel.